VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker. That is Josh Frey. We are chatting about these Vikings in this offseason. We hope this Super Bowl window will open. It's probably dependent upon JJ McCarthy's rise to stardom, which we think will happen. Surprise, surprise. But I want to get some predictions. Last night, I did my offseason endorsement of what I want the Vikings to see get done. And today we're going to talk with Josh Frey, who also writes at VikingsTerritory.com. He's going to tell us about predictions. To get things started, Josh, how are you this week?
I'm doing good, man. Excited to really dive into some of the off-season topics. I'm finally getting caught up on some draft stuff too. Yeah, it's been a fun couple weeks, even though the Vikings aren't playing for a Super Bowl. But hopefully, like you said, that window opens in 2025 and moving forward into the future. So I'm excited for what the future has for this team.
I've
Excited
got
to
to
talk
a-
about it.
I've got to ask in your free time or hobby time now, in terms of the percentage of your attention split, how much is between the NBA right now and the NFL draft, or I guess the lead up to the NFL draft?
I'm gonna be honest. I cannot watch the NBA this year for some reason. I don't know what it is, if it's just like stars constantly sitting out, or if it's just my Bucks have been an absolute frustrating mess to watch all season long, or it's just like every team just kind of looks the same out there anymore. I mean, obviously the stars stand out, but like in terms of team structure, like just everybody just chucking up these threes. There's no real variety in how these teams are playing anymore. I don't know. I just cannot watch the NBA. I just haven't been able to get into it this year, which really sucks because basketball for a long time was my number one sport.
So maybe you'll get re-intrigued on playoff time. When they lock in on defense, and we're
Yeah.
about, let's see, probably about 2.5 months from that. All right, NFL offseason, Vikings offseason in particular. I've asked you to come up with 4 or 5 predictions of the shit that you think will happen. Maybe not your endorsement like I did last night, but if you put on your soothsayer glasses, let's start. However you want to rank these, it doesn't matter. Rapid, not rapid fire. We'll go through these kind of methodically. Give me your first prediction you want to share with the world.
Well, let's get the boring stuff out of the way first. I think there's been a lot of hoopla about this Vikings quarterback situation throughout this offseason. I think we are on the same page that JJ McCarthy is the guy. Sam Darnold's probably going elsewhere. But I do think that there's an interesting question that's in terms of who's the backup. You could argue that maybe, hey, they go get like a mid-round pick in this upcoming draft and they use that, but I don't know if I necessarily want a rookie out there. I don't know if I want like an aging veteran who just is on his last legs as the backup either, though. So I think the Vikings are going to re-sign Daniel Jones, and he's going to be the backup quarterback to JJ McCarthy. I mean, obviously his career in New York didn't exactly go the way that everybody hoped it would over there in the Big Apple, but there were at least some signs, and Vikings fans know it better than most, that there were some signs and there were some moments where that dude looked absolutely unstoppable during especially that 2022 season, and then things kind of fell off the rails. But I do think it's kind of a similar situation to Sam Darnold, where he's probably not going to be starting too many games in Minnesota, and hopefully he's not starting too many games in Minnesota. But I do think that this can be like a launching pad for him to maybe go get a starting job in 2026.
That was part of my endorsement as well, so I'm glad it's part of your prediction. And I'm not a Daniel Jones guy, just like I was not a Sam Darnold guy when the Vikings signed him last March. But there's a large difference between nominating somebody as your QB2 for insurance and QB1, which we think is JJ McCarthy. I was talking with Yannick Eckhart, who's on this show somewhat frequently, and there is an argument that the Vikings should try to have Darnold back because the Super Bowl window is wide open. Yannick told me off air a real fascinating point. Like, the Vikings are not going to win a Super Bowl with Sam Darnold. They're flat out not going to do that. So why on earth would you bring him back when you already have JJ McCarthy? If there was no such thing as McCarthy, or the Vikings didn't use a first round on a quarterback, maybe we would sit here and figure out if we could talk our way into Darnold as the future. But it makes all the sense in the world to get bold, get risky, roll with your 22-year-old quarterback, and see how the chips fall. See if you can be that Josh Allen, like, Bills team where the window is just open indefinitely. Otherwise, we're back to doing the Viking shit that we've done for most of our lives and hoping a decent quarterback can get elite in January, which never happens for the Vikings, but it happens for like the Ravens in 2012. So you have locked in Daniel Jones as your QB2. That relationship has been bridged and forged in late November when the Giants said sayonara. He's on the Vikings roster now, or at least was until the end of the season. I like it. I can roll with that. And Ironically, if you would have told me 6 months ago Daniel Jones, you want him on your team, I'd be like, nope. But there's a really big difference between having a dude as your QB2 and then the guy is your solution for the future.
Absolutely. And I mean, like we've talked about on the show, there's no real guarantee that one, JJ McCarthy is even healthy at the start of the season. Like obviously that's the hope and
Hmm.
probably the plan at this point. I mean, seems like he's progressing very well, but who knows if he's able to get back on the field, especially if he's missing part of the early portions of the offseason program where he's really able to lock down what the offensive scheme is, because Kevin O'Connell's got a very intricate one over here in Minnesota. So it could take a while for a young guy to really get to know that. And then who knows if this dude's even we the scary thing is like we really don't know for sure that this dude's gonna pan out. And if it ends up being like a Bryce Young situation for a while where he just needs to take a step back and you just need to let him really hone down what this offense is mid-season. Then Daniel Jones, I think, is at least a capable guy that you can go throw in for a couple games and let JG McCarthy really just sit back and learn everything. So I'd feel really comfortable with that.
I will point out, that will suck because the reason
Yes.
Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson were benched last year was because they were utterly atrocious. Like they were not empowering their team to win a game whatsoever. It wasn't that, hey,
Right.
they were throwing a touchdown, two picks, 190. No, they flat out couldn't complete a pass at times. So let's hope we don't get there with McCarthy. What is your second prediction for the 2025 Vikings offseason?
My second one, I'm gonna do some, I've been doing some cap space maneuvering. I've spent a lot of time on over the cap over the past couple of days. And I think that a move that makes a lot of sense is restructuring Brian O'Neill's contract at right tackle. Dude's obviously he's going to turn 30. He's got 2 years left on his deal. Vikings sit right now with just about $58 million in cap space, which is a decent chunk of cash. But when you look around, they got a lot of players to re-sign on top of the holes that they have to fill. And restructuring Brian O'Neill's contract, he has no guaranteed money left. So honestly, this would probably be something that would be beneficial to both sides, where he's getting money right away, and the Vikings can free up some cap space while pushing some of his cap hits down the road into 2026. But if you restructure his contract, you're saving about $8 million more, which in and of itself, you can go get a decent cornerback out of that, and you can go plug that defensive tackle hole, something like that. Go get a veteran guard and plug him in if you don't get like a Trey Smith at the top of your free agency board. But yeah, I just think it makes a ton of sense. Get the Vikings over that $60 million in cap space, almost to $70 million if they restructure him for about $8 million to free up. And I just think it makes a ton of sense for both sides.
Is there any chance this could be an extension rather than a restructure?
It could be an extension. Yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to that at all. I mean, obviously, Brian O'Neill is one of the best right tackles in the entire league. And the only real question mark is the health issues that he's had. And now that he's going to be getting up to into the 30s,
Hmm.
that question mark is going to get a little bit bigger as he enters the second stage of his career here. But yeah, I'd be totally fine with extending Brian O'Neill. And honestly, like if you look down the road after 2026, that just opens up another hole where you have to go get another tackle and you have to nail that tackle for your young quarterback. So I would not be opposed to locking up Brian O'Neill for the next 4 or 5 years.
You mentioned Trey Smith in my writings on Territory.com, and I think once or twice on this show, I've said that Trey Smith basically has the consistency and the performance of Brian O'Neill, but
Exactly.
that's at guard. So that's cool that he brought that up. All right, so we have Daniel Jones as the QB2. You heard it here first, kinda. You have Brian O'Neill either restructured to free up cap space or an extension before the fact, before he's eligible. If he doesn't have any guaranteed money left, that's usually a prompt for a team to say, hey, you made a Pro Bowl this year. You're our guy. And solidify these bookends of the offensive line for even longer. What is prediction number three?
So I do think that the Vikings are going to end up re-signing, if not both, one of Byron Murphy or Cameron Bynum. But we've talked about them a lot. So let's go in a different direction. And this is a guy that I kind of pounded the table for last year before he went back to the Patriots. Jonathan Jones, another cornerback, a guy that has plenty of experience in the Brian Flores scheme. We know that he's a veteran corner. He's capable of starting in this NFL league. And honestly, he's 32 years old, but I mean, the Vikings got plenty of production out of Stephon Gilmore last year at
Mm-hmm.
35. So I would not be opposed to bringing that guy in. It basically like the Patrick Peterson deal a few years back. Obviously, not the same level of player as Patrick Peterson, but I think he's capable of filling a starting role at the cornerback position. And if nothing else, he's just a veteran piece and a cornerback room that is absolutely demolished heading into this offseason between Shaq Griffin, Stephon Gilmore, Byron Murphy all entering free agency. Obviously, hopefully bring back Murphy. But other than that, it's Mekhi Blackman, maybe Dwight McLaughlin, and that's about it at this point. So any sort of veteran presence would be helpful for the Vikings this offseason. I think Jonathan Jones is able to fill that.
So if they signed Jonathan Jones, other dudes like Asante Samuel Jr. are out there. Travarius Ward, who had a down year, but was usually pretty fantastic for 49ers. If they signed a guy, or in your estimation, Jones, would that be okay? We're good, or would they also still explore Siobhan Revell, who we've talked ourselves into as our guy, one of our guys in the draft? Would this be, hey, we got Jonathan Jones, Byron Murphy, Mekhi Blackman, and then boom, we're also going to draft Benjamin Morrison? Is it one of those, or is it that they will neglect corner in the round one of the draft?
I would hope that they still target a corner in the draft simply because like Jonathan Jones is kind of a band-aid solution. Like you're probably only signing him for 1 year, two at the most, given
Mm-hmm.
his age. So I would hope that they would go and target another corner in the draft just to solidify that for the future. And then you're like again, kind of like the JJ McCarthy situation. You've got a backup plan in place in case that things go wrong for that rookie corner in his first year and he doesn't pan out to be exactly what you want him to be as a rookie. And I think that Jonathan Jones is capable of doing that. And but you're also, if you go draft a corner, you're hopefully set for the future as well. So kind of killing two birds with one stone there.
They're overdue, damn it, to draft
I
one that
know,
actually
yeah.
pans out. And are you even, like we talked last week about the draft, are you even in your preference for cornerback or interior defensive line if they stick and pick at 24?
I could go either way. I think I'd probably prefer corner a little bit more than defensive tackle just because you've got so much talent at edge already that and Brian Flores has already proven time and time again that he doesn't necessarily need a stud at defensive tackle to put together a really
Yeah.
good defense. So I think I'd lean more towards corner at this point, but I'd be fine with either one. I definitely understand either side of that argument.
Yeah, if we get to week one, September blah blah blah, and the Vikings are playing the blah blah blahs, and they do not have Walter Nolan, Dione Walker, Dion Walker,
Mhm.
however you say him, Tyleik Williams, or in free agency they don't sign Milton Williams or Poona Ford or BJ Hill. If it's just Jonathan Bullard and Jerry Tillery again, I will be utterly convinced that Brian Flores does not care about what we consider an impact defensive tackle next to Harrison Phillips. Because you can't go 3 years in a row with employing mediocre guys and it be an accident. Now, the only thing that keeps me hopeful is that they'll finally address this. Is last year they allegedly were in the Christian Wilkins sweepstakes, and when they couldn't spend that cash because of Kirk Cousins and Danielle Hunter's dead money, they said, "All right, we'll just go get two edge rushers and draft Dallas Turner." So we have this kind of grand crescendo on how they view defensive tackle this offseason. What is your fourth
It's
predict? Oh yeah, sorry.
No, it's just really interesting that you bring up Christian Wilkins in this conversation because like Brian Flores, it was his first or second year as head coach for Miami that they drafted that guy.
Yeah,
So I feel like it's still like a priority for Brian Flores. It's just he hasn't found the right
yeah.
guy yet. So I'm hoping that at some point they draft a defensive tackle. And again, maybe we've talked about this. Maybe they've already got that guy on the roster, whether it be Jalen Redmond, who they just signed to a future contract, Taki Taimani, who's just the massive nose tackle presence
Mm-hmm.
that we're hoping can develop into that sort of run stuffing presence in the middle of that defensive line. But yeah, it's kind of weird thinking that that was his first priority in the first round of his first year as head coach. And then it just he hasn't done anything with it ever since, especially since he's gotten to Minnesota. So it's just weird.
I'm gonna guess it's a quasi priority thing
Yeah.
because you would look around. Well, look around the teams they're going to be in the Super Bowl, especially the Eagles. They have way too many interior defensive linemen, an embarrassment of riches. And then the Chiefs, of course, have Chris Jones. So if the Vikings decided, or if Brian Flores decided, we're the one team that doesn't need a sweet defensive tackle, you're not doing it right, fella. I mean,
Mhm.
let's be serious here. This is the way that you get pressure from the inside of the line and the outside of the line, and that's how these teams are going to the damn Super Bowl. All right, prediction number 4 from Josh Fry.
Number four for me, I think we're gonna go back to the offensive line here. I think it's Ed Ingram's time to go.
Okay.
That it's just not it hasn't panned out and just there was some decent developments in 2023, but then obviously you got benched down the stretch of this season. And I think the Vikings would save about 3 million in cap space if they just flat out cut him. And it's only like $500,000 that they'd eat in dead money
Hmm.
at this point. So I think that this is just kind of the time that the Vikings part ways with him. And obviously they'll probably, if they think that it's time for him to go as well, they'll probably look for a trade, but who are we kidding? There's not going to be too many teams that are willing to give up more than like a sixth or a seventh round pick for this guy at this point. At least I don't think so. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just think that Ed Ingram's heading out the door this offseason.
We are in this predicament talking about interior defensive line and interior offensive line fits for the Vikings because Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Rick Spielman have not been able to fix this at all in the draft. They're really, really great at other spots, especially wide receiver. The Vikings probably draft wide receivers better than anybody ever. But for a guard or a defensive tackle, for whatever reason, Sharif Floyd, like whatever reason, they cannot get this right. So this is why we're having this show right now with these needs, is because back-to-back general managers to date haven't solved the interior part of the trenches. And the most recent example is Ed Ingram because you spent a second rounder on the guy. And that was supposed to be like the one thing we could maybe cling to from the 2022 draft class was, all right, hey, Ty Chandler might be an RB2. Jalen Naylor makes some sweet plays at times. And then Ed Ingram's a starter, baby. And,
Yep.
Jalen Naylor is okay. Ty Chandler's been demoted, and Ed Ingram's going to get cut. So, yeah, we can finally write the obituary on the 2022 Vikings draft.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think Jalen Naylor is definitely coming into his own a little bit. Let's
Hmm.
fingers crossed that he stays healthy again in 2025, because again, that's going to be the key X factor for him. But he definitely showed some signs in 2024, especially for a sixth round pick that really gives some promise. But yeah, he's like the only guy from that draft class that has really panned out at this point. So very disappointing.
All right, give us your final prediction, and then I'm going to, I guess, as a bonus round, I'm going to ask you for some rapid fire things before we log off on this Wednesday. What is your final Vikings prediction of the offseason?
Final Vikings prediction. I ultimately think that the Vikings are going to trade down from the 24th overall pick to acquire some extra draft capital. Obviously, they've got this pick and probably a third round compensatory pick, although that hasn't been
Hmm.
solidified yet. And then two fifth round picks at this point. That's just not enough. That's just not enough for what this team needs at this point between the cornerback position, defensive tackle, interior offensive line, and just depth all over the place that they really need to fill. Is like linebacker depth, I think, is an underrated need for this team heading into 2025 as well. So I do think that they ultimately trade down from number 24. I think Detroit would be a team that you look at. Like they have been uber aggressive to go get their guys in recent years with Dan Campbell in the draft. So I wouldn't be surprised if they try to come up and get a guy, or maybe some of these quarterbacks start falling a little bit, and some team at the top of the second round wants to trade back into the first round to fill that need. But yeah, I just think that they can't stick and pick at 2024 at this point, or at 24 in 2025 at this point, just with all their needs. So go get your early second rounder, maybe another day two pick on top of that, add some day three picks maybe on top of that as well. And I think that they can go about filling out their roster a lot better than what they currently hold in terms of draft capital.
That's what I had in my endorsement as well. And in fact, I could see this coming the moment they did the Dallas Turner trade because the cupboard was so barren after
Oh
that.
yeah.
But what I expected was them to finish 7 and 10, which would have turned out to be like the 11th or 12th pick. And then that would have been a lot easier to trade. Or, if they would have been bad, a top five pick, and then you can just start to domino those trades and then get a whole draft class back. But they were too good. Way
Mm-hmm.
too good. A one and done Vikings team. Go figure. All right, here is my bonus round. I want your predictions here, not endorsements for this episode. Give me the identity of the Vikings RB1 and RB2 in 2025.
Oh man, this is interesting. I think RB2 is probably Cam Akers. I think they bring him back, just because I seriously think, especially down the stretch of that season, he was the one good thing that they had going in in their running game down the stretch, especially that playoff game against the Rams. So I think that they bring him back as RB2 just to really solidify that position. And this is tough, but I do think that especially if they are going to trade down, I think they draft a running back, either in the second or the third round. And I think that ultimately it's Cam Scatabo for me, especially if they hold on to that third round pick. I don't necessarily know if NFL teams are as high as Cam Scatabo as me, which is why I think that he could fall into the third round of the draft. And running backs in general, they tend to fall a little bit farther than a lot of people expect, unless they're top tier guys like Ashton Genty, who's probably going at least. He's not making it past like 12 with Dallas. So but Cam Scatabo, I think, can be your RB1 heading into 2025 as a rookie. I think he's that good. I think he can catch the ball. He runs between the tackles. He's a physical player. He just plays bully ball, and I think that he's capable of holding down the offense. And if things go awry, then you got Cam Akers there as well, and he's able to make some plays for you too. So I think those would be my two hopefuls for the Vikings in terms of their RB room.
Yannick Eckhart recently told me, I think it was during the game they lost to exit the college football playoff, that Cam Scatabo looks like he could be my son. So we have entered the
Yeah.
first draft in NFL history where one of the players looks like he could be my kid. Never happened to me before. Uh, Let me ask you this: if they say, you know what, Josh, we're not doing that, we're doing a free agent running back. Is it more likely? Or let's ask you for what you do here: Aaron Jones, Javonte Williams, Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, J.K. Dobbins, or Jalen or Rico Dowdle? Which guy would you target if they're gonna do a veteran plus Scatabo?
I think Rico Dottle makes the most sense just because I don't necessarily think he's going to be overly expensive. And despite the Cowboys' struggles in 2024, I think he was a guy that really kind of burst onto the scene a little bit in his first real year as a starter. I think he's a physical player. He can run between the tackles, and I think he can hold. He's proven he can hold down an RB1 job, at least for a mediocre team like Dallas. So hopefully he can do that for Minnesota as well. If they end up going that way.
Yeah, Dowdle should have been their version of a bell call way before they figured it out. I don't
Oh
know
yeah.
why they were monkeying around with Ezekiel Elliott and then signing Dalvin Cook. Bless his heart. The Kevin O'Connell said after the Rams lost that we need to fix the interior pass protection. How many new of the three, Bradbury, Brandel, and I guess Reisner, how many new interior offensive linemen will they have week one that will start?
At this point, I feel like I'm leaning towards one, and
Okay.
it's replacing Reisner at right guard. But I wouldn't be opposed if they can go find a center as well. I feel like Garrett Bradbury again. He's turning 30. He hasn't really shown that he's taken the big leap that everybody hoped he was going to as a first round pick. But I also feel like you can't go draft a center and have him be the guy snapping the ball to a rookie corner as well. So I do think that if they end up getting rid of Bradbury, it needs to be a veteran guy that they bring in, a guy that's been around the block a couple times in the NFL. But at this point, I'm leaning towards one for that reason. I think they bring back Bradbury, and if things really look bad in 2025, maybe they look at the trade market down
Okay.
at the deadline.
Who's the WR3 on the field week one?
I think it's Jalen Naylor.
Okay.
I think that he's solidified it throughout the course of last season. I think that this guy, he can be a deep threat. He can make plays. I feel like he took a big leap in 2024, and I think he holds it down.
If they do draft a fifth rounder or so, because they have two of those, do you have any sexy dudes that you've got your eye on yet? Or you got to save that for another episode?
Let's save it for another episode because I haven't gotten that far into the weeds quite yet.
Yeah, no, that's all right. And then my last thing, similar formatted question. The defensive tackle spot that's manned by Jerry Tillery or Jalen Redmond, who starts there?
Say it again, Jalen Redmond or who?
So usually starts at defensive tackle. This year it was kind of a mix between Tillery and Redmond.
Mhm.
Will it be one of those guys or who will it be?
I think it's one of those guys.
Okay.
Again, it just feels like Brian Flores just hasn't found his guy, and unless I really feel like they need to go get a defensive tackle early on in the draft, and I just feel like corner is a much more pressing need at this point
Yeah.
in the draft. So as much as I'd be fine with drafting a defensive tackle, feel like I feel like corner's the way that they're going to go, just in terms of value, and with the guys that are going to be available at that point in the draft. Because I think that there's going to be a couple studs, especially those Michigan boys that go in the first round, and then it's kind of just a hodgepodge of really good players, but not necessarily the guys that you want week one
Hmm.
that can really hold down the fort and you really feel comfortable that they're going to be starting defensive tackle. So I think it's going to be a combo of Jalen Redmond and maybe Jerry Tillery again.
If they do not draft a corner with their first pick, I think it will be because they re-signed Byron Murphy.
Yeah.
They signed Asante Samuel, for example. They also brought back Shaq Griffin as a spot starter if needed. Mekhi Blackman's coming back. And then we all still have big plans for Dwight McGlothern. That's the only way that I see them saying, no thanks on cornerback. All right, Josh, we'll be back next Wednesday. We'll come up with a topic before then. Anything else, sir?
No, that's about it. It was fun chatting and excited to dig deeper into this offseason in the weeks ahead. So
Yeah,
it's going to be a
start
good time.
studying WR3s just in case they use one in the fifth round. All right, my
All
dude.
right, I can.
All right, take it easy.
See you, man.
Later.